All right, here we go. Starting the stream up. Salute to Knicks Nation worldwide, wherever you guys are watching from. CP from Knicks Fan TV. Special guest on the Knicks Fan TV podcast tonight. We're going to take a trip down memory lane and relive some of the classic moments in Knicks history with someone who had a front row seat for it all. He's the host of the Bottom Line Sports Show on Sirius XM Radio with Rick Mahorn. And he's also the co-host of the Let's Get Technical podcast with Rasheed Wallace and Bonzi Wells, which recently released. He goes by the name of Gerald Brown. Gerald, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing fine, brother. How's everything going?
Good, man. Definitely appreciate you coming on. So let's get right into it, man. You were born and raised in New York, Harlem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Harlem, New York, born and raised.
Harlem, USA, man. Uptown in the building. When did you become a ball boy with the Knicks? When did you get that role?
It had to be, I think, Patrick Ewing's second year in the league. It was funny, man, because I was working on 125th Street. It was like one of these jobs where I wasn't old enough to get on the book money. And so these guys had this sneaker store called Vet Sneaker Store, and they were paying me off the books. So one night, this lady came in, and she was gorgeous, and man, she was so gorgeous and everything. She came in, and nobody really wanted to help her because we were closing up. Came in, and woman doing shoe shopping, no offense. She took her time and stuff, and I showed her a pair of sneakers that she really enjoyed, and she felt kind of rushed, but I told her, I said, no, don't worry about it. And just in the blink of an eye, it's kind of like one of those old movies where she just said to me, hey, you like basketball? And I said, yeah, I love it. She said, how would you like to work for the Knicks?
Wow.
And I was like, huh? And she pulled out her card and told me, give her a call. And she was the executive vice president of the NBA entertainment side, Leah Wilcox. And, Leah was the one that got me in there. Went to see her that Monday. She made a phone call to the Knicks, Mike Saunders. I went in for an interview.
Legendary trainer Mike Saunders. Nice.
Yes. Rest is history.
Nice. So this is what year? This is what, 86?
86, yeah, because it was Ewing's second year, and I remember that that year Hubie Brown got fired midway through the season. I think towards the tail end of the season, Bob Hill cleaned it up and stuff, and I think Ewing got hurt because I think it was right around that time. It was like anticipating that Ewing and Bernard King would be able to play. And I remember going to get Bernard King's jersey and uniform from the cleaners. There was a cleaners right there on 8th Avenue. I went down there, and I was running through the streets with Bernard's. It's like a single cleaners bag, and it had the old warm-up jacket that said King on the back. So I was running through the streets, and it was hilarious. People were just sitting there, oh, that's Bernard. It was
that was one of the most disappointing. I was only about 3-4 years old around that time, so I completely missed Bernard's era and even the beginning of Ewing. But I mean, that was one of the more disappointing situations to not having been able to see those two guys play, right? Like, I mean, from a fan standpoint, how did you feel about that back in those days?
I think that, it was one of those things where you wanted to see what they could be like. Bernard was a kind of a guy that, management kind of wrote him off. They didn't really want to pay him. They thought that he was really never going to recover. But his past really was one that it warranted to see how they would have matched up well, and possibly, just possibly, if everything would have went well. Hindsight is 2020, because you think about it, Bernard doesn't have that injury somewhere down the line. You don't get Patrick Ewing in New York. And then if they would have held on to him, you could have had a combination of maybe Patrick and Bernard for some period of time, and then you throw in the mix and have a Mark Jackson come in there behind there. So it was always an opportunity, but it just never worked out for the Knicks. Just never worked out.
One of those what ifs that continues to kill this franchise, man. Continues to play this franchise. So, all right. So let's fast forward to 1988, right? Rick Pitino's the coach. This is your final season as the ball boy of the team. This was the infamous bomb squad. So Ewing was already on the team. You had Mark Jackson. You had Johnny Newman on the team. You also had Trent Tucker, who was a part of that bomb squad. Gerald Wilkins as well. That year, if we start with the construction of the team, that year they also drafted Rod Strickland. Now, we know Rod coming up from Gauchos, Mark Jackson coming up from Bishop Loughlin. What was that like? What was the city like when we drafted Rod Strickland, knowing that we had Mark Jackson on the team as well?
It was really interesting because that was a team that I think that it was Rick Pitino's kind of like first year or so, and they had a ton of success, and they were able to, I think, make the playoffs and snuck in as the eighth seed and everything like that. And I think back then you knew that they would have the makings of something because I think it coincided with them getting Rod Strickland. They drafted Rod Strickland. They made the trade for Bill Cartwright for Charles Oakley for Bill Cartwright.
Yeah.
So you had some pieces coming together, and I always look back on that and just conversations and talking with Coach Pitino in the past. I really think that he was ahead of his time. And you look at that specifically era where you have the Knicks bomb squad. That was a team that I think honestly, based upon the way they shot the three-point shot, if they were in today's game, you would probably say they would be something considered along the lines of the Golden State Warriors because they relied heavily on that three-point shot. And really, I think was something that caused Patrick Ewing to be more of a guy that would be able to face up and utilizing that little short jumper that he started to have in his arsenal later on in his career.
Yeah, as you said, Patino's really looking to space that floor around Ewing, surround him with shooters, full court press, turn up the pressure on defense. They ended up attempting 1,147 three-pointers, shattering the record by 400 threes in the previous year. They made about 386 of those. So between Tucker, Wilkins, Mark Jackson, they were letting it fly out there, man, for sure. Another person, they ended up trading for Kiki Vandeweghe. But based on my research, they were after Chris Mullin fairly, quite heavily. What did you think about the prospects of potentially getting Chris Mullin back in those days?
I tell you this, it would have been something that first and foremost would have sold tickets. Again, it would have been another face that is familiar with the fan base there. And also at that point in time, adding Chris to that mix, who had played and started to come into his own after really a substance abuse battle. I thought that, he would really help that franchise, and, teaming up with Mark Jackson along with Patrick Ewing. And now you have this sort of core guys of the Big East. But I just thought it would have been great. But it was just always one of those things, where the Knicks, I think at that point in time, they could have drafted Chuck Person. They ended up taking Kenny Walker. They were always in a situation where Kiki Vandeweghe, an elite scorer in his time, but, bad back and everything, really just never could do anything. And I just never understood even the drafting of Rod Strickland. Go back to a question you asked me earlier.
Yeah.
I never understood that point. And I think that the issues along those lines is really what kind of drove Rick Pitino to leave, the Knicks and go to Kentucky because some of the issues with the late great Al Bianchi and some of the people in the front office, it just became something that was out in the open. After games and stuff, they weren't speaking, and Coach Pitino was really full of himself back then. But Al Bianchi and him really never got along, and it was just really a head scratcher for them to draft Rod Strickland, who with him and Pitino was like oil and water from day one.
Wow. Another would-be Knick that got picked in that draft with Anthony Mason, 58th pick in the third round to Portland, but would end up linking up with the Knicks a few years later. Who was the guy on the team that you were closest with during your tenure there? Was it Oak? Was it Ewing?
It's so funny because they were like brothers to me, and they still are. I talked to, Oak. In fact, he called me a couple of days ago. We check in. Mark, I spoke to Mark, had him on the show a few months back and stuff. But Rod, I talk to all the time. Johnny Newman, Pat, and like I said, Patrick, Oak, Trent Tucker.
Yeah.
It was just a real unique group of people, and they were really just family and brothers and stuff like that, where, we would get along and we would kid, and I wouldn't see them as these, phenomenal athletes and stuff, but just respect them as like my big brother, Gerald Wilkins, all of them, just great, great guys.
Real interesting, man. Very, very cool. So now this team goes on to win 52 games in regular season. They win the Atlantic. They would procure the second seed in the East. Do you remember what the expectations were at that time? Did you really think the team could really make a run for it? Or do you think they kind of just overachieved and kind of just, play it out through the playoffs and see where they end up.
No, I think this team really could make a run, and I think the way they were built, with bringing in some of the pieces that they had and having a guy like a Johnny Newman added to the mix who came into his own, the way they utilized that 3-point shot was something that no other team. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe you had the West Coast teams who were really just running gun up and down the court, the Denver Nuggets, the Portland Trailblazers, the Lakers, of course. But the Knicks were really ahead of their time with Coach Pitino and utilizing that 3-point shot. And that 3-point shot alone was something that was really, really a deadly, deadly weapon that they had. And then lo and behold, you have a Charles Oakley is kind of that enforcer to back up Patrick Ewing and stuff like that. And then you having Pat, who is really a great combination for an inside-out game. So I just thought that team was a very, very special team. And, utilizing that jump shot, again, they were ahead of their time. But utilizing that 3-point shot, I thought that they could definitely do some damage in the playoffs.
So now first round, they take on Charles Barkley and the Sixers. And Barkley had the Knicks number that year. The Sixers had beaten the Knicks 4 out of 6 that year. I believe Barkley was averaging something like 30 points and 10 boards, just completely dominating. Knicks had no answer for him. What was your reaction to the way that series played out?
Well, it's so funny because I'm looking at the video, and when Mark just dunked the ball, I'm actually sitting on the sideline. And just remembering that series, it was back and forth. And this was a team that really had to grow up and I think really became battle tested because that was a great matchup for them in that first round with going up against a guy like Barkley, Mike Jaminski, a lot of veterans. And they really had to reach down because this was a team that hadn't been there before. But it's funny because once that series was over and the Knicks closed them out in Philly, I remember getting the broom and Charles Oakley telling me, go get the broom. And that was the infamous thing where, some of the Sixers fans thought that they were rubbing it in the face, but they told me to go get the broom. And I went and got the broom and they were out there. And I believe that they swept them. So,
they swept them 3-0. Each game came down to pretty much the buzzer. Now, this was back in the day when they had 5-game series in the first round.
Right.
So you had to win 3, and you had to make sure that you at least split those first 2, or else it was a tough sledding. But Knicks were able to sweep them in 3. Gerald Wilkins overtime heroics. So now I'm showing the video now with them bringing the broom out. So you went where? Into the back of the stadium to get the broom?
Yeah, if you go back to that clip, you'll see me after I went and got the broom was on the back of the stanchion of the basket, and they were just like, go get the broom. So I'm actually sitting there on the sidelines, and if you go back, once the guy that's walking there, if you see me, I'm right behind. Yeah, that's me there behind next to Kenny Walker. So we were like, they was like, get the broom, bring the broom out. And it became a big thing, Eddie Lee Wilkins and all these guys. And I think a lot of people felt that they were trying to rub it in the face.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that did not, take too kindly to that type of sportsmanship, but still funny to this day, man. So they would end up facing the Bulls in the next round. Knicks were the 2 seed. Bulls were the 6 seed, had just beaten the 3 seed Cavaliers on the infamous Jordan shot against Craig Elo. Knicks would end up losing in 6, man. What was your recollection of how that series went?
All I can remember is after the Knicks beat the Sixers, I was kind of like, torn because I said, man, can you imagine a series of having Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls come to New York City? And this is now, I believe, a 4 out of 7 series. So you're going to have them at Madison Square Garden. And, the Mecca is just going to be so much energy in there. And having him come there, I thought it'd be great, but he was scary. He was very scary. And it was also a flip side of that. And I thought that perhaps they could have a better chance of beating the Bulls compared to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who back then, they had Mark Price, Larry Nance, John Hot Rod Williams, rest in peace, Craig Elo. They just had a very formidable team that was very difficult defensively. Brad Doherty was a legit scorer. So this was a team I thought would really give the Knicks some problems,
Mm.
but you have an upstart Chicago Bulls team back then. I thought that they would have a sure chance of beating Michael Jordan and them.
Jordan damn near averaged 35 and 10 in this series, couple 40-point games. It would go down to the wire in Chicago, man. 9 seconds left. Trent Tucker, Knicks are down 4. Trent Tucker hits the 3 and 1. You damn near jump off the bench, the first person off the bench. I mean, well, what was the the thoughts there in those closing seconds, man?
Man, I tell you, it's so funny seeing all these highlights and stuff. First of all, when I got there, I went out after the team. So I actually took the train out there because I had finished. I think it was just something I was doing. I couldn't even leave the school or whatever. And got out there, but I flew back with them. But the interesting thing about it is that going into Chicago Stadium, and that back then, it was just really, it was in the hood. People were, parking lots was just alleys and stuff like that. And then you go in, it's funny because you walk down into the stadium and then you come up, and to hear the fan roar. And when they would play that and the Bulls anthem and stuff like that and get them in now, it was deafening to hear that. And I mean, that was perhaps the loudest arena I've ever been in, where fans were screaming and there was nothing but, again, it worked as a true home court advantage. And when he hit that, I thought that they would be able to pull it out, because I think that was my last year officially as a ball boy before I went away to school.
Yeah, and so the Knicks did end up tying it up, but with 6 seconds left, Jordan drives and gets fouled by, I believe it was either Johnny Newman or Tucker, and hits the 2 free throws to win the game. Knicks would end up losing in 6, and that was the end of your run as the ball boy. So now you moved to Boston for college?
Yes, I was up
Okay.
there. I was going to junior college playing some ball up there at Mount Ida College, and Mike Saunders had asked me, hey, you're going to school. Would you, like to work for the Knicks, work for the Celtics? And I said, sure, why not? So I think I had met the trainer, or one of the did a favor for them and ran an errand for them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the players, I think, lost their jersey or had their jersey stolen, so I had to go get a jersey from Cosby's. They used to be downstairs.
So this was Larry. Wasn't this Larry Bird?
Yeah, it was Larry Bird. So I think somehow they lost his jersey or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get a jersey from Cosby's, took a cab out to the Meadowlands and took it back and took care of them for that. And because of that, they were like, would you like to work there? And so they made a phone call, and it was understood. I used to be a ball boy for the Knicks.
Yeah.
Larry, Dennis Johnson, all those guys knew me. So it was like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
But it became a little issue, I guess, in the playoffs. And I was just wondering if they would face the Knicks, how would it be? But,
how would it be? So you infiltrated enemy territory. You're in Boston, working for the Celtics, literally and figuratively enemy territory. Jerry Cosby's, which was a store. Shout out my guy Chris Shamus. We just did a fan cave documentary on it, and he's got a All-Star game John Starks jersey, Jerry Cosby one, and he also has a Rory Sparrow authentic Jerry Cosby one as well. Yeah, you got to see that episode, Gerald. When you get a chance, I'll send you the link. But anyway,
definitely.
So Bird loses his jersey. You go to Cosby, get a Boston Larry Bird jersey, take it over the tunnel, through the tunnel, to the Meadowlands where they're playing. The Celtics are playing the Nets. Get him the jersey, and that's pretty much how you kind of cemented your role there as the ball boy.
Right, yeah, and because Mike Saunders talked to them, and they were like, "Sure, no problem," and all I had to do was just get in the cab, had the cab driver wait, went in, they met me at the tunnel, got back in the cab, and went back to the Garden.
So, I mean, this is 1989, 1990. Red Auerbach is still the coach of the Celtics. I mean, this is arguably the greatest basketball coach in our history. What was that like? What was that dynamic like being around him?
Well, he was the president. I think he was like the president of the team, and I think it was either Jimmy Rogers. I think was the
Jimmy
head
Rogers
coach.
was the coach. Yeah.
It was funny because the Garden was something all that I'd known, and you're talking about the locker rooms and seeing how it was set up. And the Boston Garden, when I first got there, I just couldn't believe how run down it was. And I put my coat inside the the main locker room where the players put their coats on. I'll never forget it. I had just gotten a coat, brand new coat. It was up there. And I put my coat inside the locker room, and putting it inside the locker room. I ended up putting it in the locker room. And the next thing you know, I come back after the game and my coat was stolen. So I couldn't understand that. It was freezing cold. It was the winter. And, I just couldn't understand it. And this was a security guard in the locker room. And it was hard. It was gut wrenching, man, because I had to go back on the train and had no coat with a sweater on. And then the next game, Dennis Johnson gave me money. God rest his soul.
Yeah,
He gave me money. He was like, "Hey, man, go buy you a coat, man. Sorry that happened." But
somebody knew from that time, man, that you were a Knicks fan and they were messing with you, Gerald. That's how those Bostonians go, man. You can't trust them. Left you out there in the cold with no jacket. Come on, man.
Yeah.
That was by design for sure. 100%, man. Do you feel like, when you were working with the Celtics, I remember I was reading the Jordan rules and you would always hear about the urban legends about what's going on in the Celtics locker room. They turn the heat up to 100 degrees or, some of the gamesmanship that they would do on the opponents. Did you ever see any of that kind of going on in the stadium?
No, I think some of that might have just been folk tales and stuff because the place was just a really rundown arena. And if you think about it, it was during that era of time that we started to move into a time and place where a lot of these old arenas were sort of being phased out because it was just really a rundown arena, with the dead spots in the floor. It was so hot and humid in there because, again, with all the people in there, proper lack of ventilation in there, it was definitely a building that had run its course.
Yeah. Absolutely interesting. So now the Knicks and the Celtics both finished 4-5 respectively in the East. Collision course into the first round. Game 1, Knicks are visiting Boston. They would lose game 1 by about 11 points. What was your reaction just knowing that your team was coming into town and that you're working for the enemy? How did you see yourself in that situation?
It was funny because, Larry, I used to ride back and forth from my school on Sundays when they would have the T. Wasn't running early enough for the Sunday afternoon games that used to be on CBS. And I would ride back with him. And I remember we rode into Boston together. And Larry just kept telling me, man, what he was going to do to the Knicks. He was going to kill Johnny Newman. He couldn't guard him. And here we were in this car, and I'm sitting there, and this guy was just going off and off. But I sat up under the basket, and all the guys knew that, so he was good with it, and he was laughing. I didn't have an impact or effect on the game whatsoever. So that first game, they crushed him, man. And it was, I was hoping that the Knicks win because, like I said, those were my big brothers. And I was just hoping that they'd win. And then they lost that first game, and then they come back for game 2. That's when everything got a little crazy and stuff, and really started the whole thing.
Yeah, so first off, I think it's crazy that you and Larry Bird are basically carpooling to the games.
Yeah,
That's crazy how you gotta just slip that in there. But the trash talk of Larry Bird, that is certainly common knowledge. I mean, I was watching old interviews with Magic and Patrick Ewing, and they would always just talk about how foul Bird was on the court. Man, he would just destroy your ego on the court, man.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so now we lose the game 1 by about 11. So now what happens with you after that?
So, game 2 comes, I'm coming in, just regular thing. And I'm actually going into the restroom of the Celtics locker room. And then all of a sudden, this guy who's like the head manager, his name is Pete. He comes in, and while I'm using the bathroom, he's like, "Hey, you've been fired by Red Auerbach. You've been fired, Red Auerbach. You've been fired by Red Auerbach for cheering for the Knicks." And I was laughing at first. And I was like, huh? I was like, "Man, get out of here. Let me use bathroom, man. Let me wash my hands. Get out of here." He was like, "No." And he said it again.
Yeah.
And then he goes into his pocket and pulls out this envelope, which was my pay. And I was like, "What?" And he just delivered the message. And I can remember just walking out of the locker room. And I was just shocked, and I kind of got teary-eyed, and I go into the Knicks locker room to tell them, and they were pissed, man. And like, I was just gonna leave, And Patrick was like, nah, man, stay. And it was like, what? And Charles Oakley was like, what? Are you serious? And they were just so amped up. They was like, nah, 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 you staying, you staying. And so I sat on the sidelines with them for the second game. They got hammered. And then I came back to whatchamacallit, and really came back and stuff and just made sure that I was there for the third game. And, they were really, it told me I was a good luck charm. So they won 3 and 4. And then I had to go back because I think it coincided with like my spring break. I went back for game 5. And that's when it happened. And they were telling me, they was like, yo, win this game, go throw that towel, put the towel over the leprechaun.
So,
But yeah, they told me the story, and it was the story was that during game 2, before game 2 in film, the Knicks were actually, the Celtics were actually watching the video of the game, and Larry just says, "Man, look at Gerald cheering for the Knicks like that."
oh,
And Red Auerbach thought he was serious, and Red told him to get rid of me. And Larry had told me that, if you want your job back or whatever, you get it back. But I was cool. So that's why, it brought me nothing but great pleasure to really wave that towel and see
yeah.
them go ahead and send them home.
Absolutely, man. That's interesting stuff. But then on top of that game too, that same game where you're back with your old team, reunited, they get blown out by 30 points, man. They're down in the series 2-0. That had to be tough to take, man, in enemy territory on the road.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. It wasn't gonna look good.
Yeah.
It definitely looked good. But I think the thing that was really interesting about that team, it was just like the fact is that the residual, the fortitude and just the toughness of that team. It was truly amazing in how they stuck together. And I always felt that team was kind of, the start of sort of the downward spiral, if you will, for the Knicks all the way to this point. I think that, if Patino would have stayed, they might have been able to, again, get over the hump. Now, granted, Jordan was there, but I thought that they were really, really a team that was going to be tough and athletic. And again, like I said before, utilizing that 3-point shot will really offset a lot of Michael Jordan and things of that nature. But from Patino leaving, then you brought in Stu Jackson, who really couldn't hold it down. And then obviously they decide to go with Pat Riley, who, was there for a cup of coffee. And then it was Jeff Van Gundy. And then it just really kind of slid all the way down. But it just been really one of those things where you go back, that team was a very, very special team. And if you're talking about that team staying together, adding some pieces, who knows how things would have played out for them later on in the 90s.
And even during those Patino years, if they do execute a Mullen trade, I mean, they ended up working out John Starks in the summer of 1990. And so you could have potentially had a lineup of something along the lines of Ewing, Chris Mullin, John Starks. Maybe you still have Mark Jackson there. That could have been something to see, man. Could have definitely been something to see, for sure. That series with the Celtics going in, and they come back. They would end up coming back down 2-0 and winning 3 in a row. They had lost something like 26 straight in Boston. So, I mean, it was almost like a miracle that they even came back and won. So maybe it was you that was the good luck charm after all, man.
Yeah, and you know what? I started to believe that, and the guys was like, "Man, you staying here? Yo, you got to come to the games, and you definitely coming to the games." And that was a special, special team because the pieces that they added, I really felt that they were just a couple of pieces away. And the decision, like I said before, from Patino, even the Rod Strickland trade, they traded Rod for Maurice Cheeks. It just really, really wasn't good moves that they made. And I think that has kind of been sort of the history of the Knicks, some of the head scratchers, some moves of getting guys that were kind of, past their prime, a la Kiki Vandeweghe, Rolando Blackman, Doc Rivers somewhat, Derek Harper, really getting guys that were at the tail end of their careers.
A little too late. A little too late.
Yeah. And so that was really a hurtful thing. But hopefully they'll turn it around.
Yeah, hopefully, man. Two more quick questions before I go. And salute to everybody in the chat. Hit that thumbs up button for you boys. We're talking to Gerald Brown of the Bottom Line Sports Show on Sirius XM, also co-host of the Let's Get Technical podcast featuring Rasheed Wallace and Bonzi Wells. Gerald, we had Oak on the show. Since then, on our show, he made some comments about Patrick Ewing, called him soft, said he was high maintenance, hard to deal with as a player. He's since kind of doubled down on those remarks on shows after that. What do you make of his comments? I mean, these are guys that you still look up to this day. What did you make of Oakley's comments about Ewing?
Well, both of them, I still consider them my brothers, and it's sad, it's unfortunate. I think that a lot of issues that they've had privately has now become publicly. And, one thing about Charles gave his heart and his soul to the Knicks. And really, that's why I think he's adored by all the Knicks fan base. Because, again, he's a people's person. He'll walk out in the street, he'll talk to everybody. And he really was a guy that just basically gave his heart and his soul. And then I just think that this stems from the fact of the things that transpired with him and James Dolan.
Yeah,
in terms of just, and it hurts. And I think, obviously not having the support of Patrick has really bothered him. And I've tried to get those two together and just be in a situation where they could get together and possibly speak and just talk about so many things that bother them and stuff. And that's Patrick's kind of DNA. He's been kind of reserved and it's been kind of uncomfortable for him. But I would hope that they would basically be in a situation that they could rectify this situation publicly. And even with, the owner of James Dolan, I think that, unfortunately, I'm a New Yorker, love the New York Knicks and stuff. But, again, to see that happen with Charles, something has to be done. And I went to the game and the Lakers played the Knicks played the Lakers and got an opportunity to be in the room with him, James Dolan, Steve Mills, and Scott Perry. I think, Dolan gets a bad rap in some way, in terms of some of the stuff he does, and just trying to help this franchise. I don't condone any of the things he's done in terms of the fans and having these things he says, but I think the best thing he can do coming off of this whole pandemic and stuff is really extend an olive branch to Charles Oakley and bring him back into the mix, because it just doesn't look good for the franchise. And maybe that would be something that gets the, jumpstarts the organization turned around in the right direction.
Yeah, hopefully, man. We certainly made our attempts, and hopefully they'll rectify the situation, at least for the fan base, while this team goes through a rebuild, man. Well, John, I know you got to go. I definitely appreciate the time that you gave us here and dropping some jewels on back in the days and taking a trip down memory lane. Hopefully you'll come back and join us, man. Let the fans know where they can find you.
Hey, definitely, always, and man, always. I love to come back on anytime, man, and talk some current Knicks stuff. But you can find me on Instagram as well as on Twitter, Gerald BLSS. I got to get my Instagram follower game up, so I'm gonna be working on that. But thank you for having me, brother. Peace and love. Great what you're doing, and like I said, in the future, I'd love to come on and talk about the Knicks and hopefully talk about them. Back to talking about basketball.
Yeah, sure thing, Gerald. Well, be safe, and thanks again for joining us, man. Definitely appreciate the time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
All right, man. Take care. That was Gerald Brown of the Bottom Line Sports Show, Sirius XM Radio. He co-hosts that show with Rick Mahorn. He also has a podcast with BJ Armstrong. Does some work with BJ Armstrong as well. And Let's Get Technical, the podcast with Rasheed Wallace and Bonzi Wells. You can catch that on YouTube or on your major podcast platforms as well. So, good interview. I just want to take a trip down memory lane. It is Thursday, and I've been playing a lot of classic games. You've been seeing a lot of classic content on MSG, so we want to do the same thing, just put a different spin on it. We want to talk about some of our classic moments with people who were actually there, give you a different perspective on it, different take on it. So Gerald's is definitely right up there, man. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Salute to everybody in the chat. Salute to Gregory W, Andrew, Ishmael, I see you, Keith Sinclair, Rome, Greg, Kent Scott, I appreciate it, John Talento, Chris Shamus in the building. Chris, how you feeling? We'll be back on some point this weekend. We'll catch up. We'll take some phone calls. Not tonight. We'll take some phone calls this weekend. Catch up with the family. Hope you guys are doing well during the quarantine, man. Tri-Bar Gigolo, I see you. Appreciate it. Remember that these shows are available in audio podcast format: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Alexa, and Stitcher. If you guys are Apple Podcasts, iTunes listeners, if you can just leave us a review on iTunes, it would go a long way. Definitely appreciate it. And as usual, man, please share this show on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter, email, text. Send it to a friend that's a Knicks fan. If you know someone that's a Knicks fan that has not yet seen our shows or heard our podcast, bring them in. The more the merrier, man. We want as many people as possible to support us, and in turn, we'll continue to deliver quality content. So, yeah, man, that's it for me. Just a quick show, quick interview, and I'll catch up with you guys this weekend, man. Be safe.